without a willingness to give on both sides, there's no reason to believe that this stalemate won't continue well into next year.
Some Democrats believe President Obama did not have to strike a deal with Republicans today. He could have refused to accept their demands, let the Bush tax rates for all brackets expire on January 1st, and continued the battle in the 112th Congress. But 5 Democrats in the Senate joined Republicans this weekend to block the Obama approach to tax cuts. So what options did the president really have after losing votes in the Senate? Time to turn to an experienced Senate strategist, the chairman of the Budget Committee, Democratic Senator from North Dakota, Kent Conrad. Thanks for joining us, Senator. Senator, what did those votes on the Senate floor mean on Saturday if the Democrats couldn't hold on to 5 Democrats on each one of those votes? There were 5 defections to the Republican side. Does that demonstrate that the Senate was incapable of passing what would have been the Obama tax plan all along?
You know, Lawrence, no one knows better than you the rules of the Senate, which are very curious for anybody outside of this body. But majority does not carry the day in the United States Senate. You've got to have a supermajority of 60 votes. And the reality is Democrats don't have 60 votes in the United States Senate. So the prospects for doing things precisely the way we want to do them is limited. It requires us to work with those across the aisle in order to achieve a result.
And do you think it is wise for the White House to be engaged in these negotiations with Republicans right now? There are many on the left side of the Democratic Party saying no, there should be no negotiations. You should be daring the Republicans to continue to vote against these tax cuts for all except the top tax bracket.
Look, I don't think the president had much alternative. Knowing that he could not command 60 votes in the Senate, he is left with this very tough prospect. Either he achieves a result with the Republicans, or all taxes go up for everyone, including the middle class, next year. The economists are telling him that if that were to occur, economic growth next year could be cut in half. There could be a sell-off in the stock market of 10 to 15%. Most important, the jobs picture would become even more dire. So the president is faced with a very, very difficult set of choices here. I frankly understand why he feels a necessity to get a result here to prevent the kind of economic damage that his advisors are telling him would occur.
Now, a Nobel Prize-winning economist in the New York Times today, Paul Krugman, says that if all the tax brackets were to go up, the damage would not be so significant. He also says in his piece that President Obama, Republicans believe, wouldn't dare preside over a broad tax increase while the economy is depressed. And he maintains that because the Republicans think that, they've been able to hold to their position. But it seems to be that is exactly what President Obama thinks, that he will not preside over a tax increase during this recession. And do you think that that politically that is the right choice for President Obama at this point, as well as in policy terms?
You know, look, I have high regard for Paul Krugman, but the economists advising the president, the economists advising us here in Congress have all said that we would see a significant slowdown in economic growth if at least the middle class tax cuts were not extended. Republicans have drawn a line in the sand. They've said no way. Are they going to decouple? Are they going to separate high-income earners from middle-income people in this country? And the result is the president faced a very daunting decision. I personally agree with his decision. I don't think he had much choice.
Now, if the Democrats chose just to make the point and stand and fight on this and let the rates expire, if that's what the Republicans, in effect, forced to happen on the Senate floor, could you describe how it would work in the next session if you were trying to do the tax cuts, let's say, in January or February, if you were trying to revisit this? First of all, you'd be presumably trying to revisit it retroactively, because in the first pay period, first paychecks in January, people would already be getting withholding from the IRS on those new higher tax rates. So you'd have to go in there and retroactively refund that money through the tax code. This would be a doubly complex tax bill to try to do if you were trying to do it next year, wouldn't it?
Lawrence, you are dead on. I used to be a tax commissioner, so tax administration is something I'm familiar with. you would have a chaotic filing season, because not only would you have the question of the rates and withholding changing, you would also have to deal with the alternative minimum tax. And the administrators at IRS have said you would have chaos on your hands. So none of this is as simple as it appears to some.
And when you look at the lower rates, many of which have been ignored in this discussion since people are only talking about the top bracket, it turns out in that scenario, the highest tax increase would occur from the 10 to 15% bracket. The lowest bracket would end up getting hit with the highest percentage tax increase, which they would be paying on day one in January. Isn't that what the president has in mind while everyone else has their eye on this top tax bracket, forgetting what would be happening to all the other brackets if this thing didn't get done in December?
Yeah, I think the president understands absolutely that the people who would be the hardest hit, would get the biggest percentage tax increase, are the very most vulnerable in our society. In addition, I think the president has his eye right on the economic issue when his advisors and others are saying to him, look, you could reduce economic growth from 1.7% in the first quarter of next year to 0.6% if the middle class tax cuts are not extended. The truth is the high income tax cuts are also mildly stimulative. They aren't good bang for the buck. They're way down the list of what CBO says is effective stimulus. I'm talking now about the high-end tax cuts. But they are mildly stimulative because some of that money gets spent even on the high end. But look, as a matter of policy, what is so critical is the longer term. At what point do we pivot and have fundamental tax reform that asks the wealthiest among us to pay somewhat more, because ultimately that is going to have to be done.
Kent Conrad, you're one of the Democrats who took the risk of voting for these tax rates in the first place in 1993 under President Clinton, the rates that would go into effect if the Bush rates expired. I don't remember you getting an awful lot of support from any side of our politics in those days for casting what was then the tough vote. Are you surprised by how much support for holding on to, in effect, what would become the Clinton rates has developed on the left side of your party?
Lawrence, you have a very good memory. That was very tough. That was a deficit reduction package under President Clinton. I supported those increases in rates in order to bring the deficit down. It worked. We actually balanced the budget. We actually stopped raiding Social Security at the final 3 years of the Clinton administration, got the budget under control. We're actually paying down the deficit, or paying down the debt. And then we had the Bush tax cuts, which I opposed. I voted against the Bush tax cuts. Now we have the question of what do we do in this economic downturn. It's clear to me that at least the middle class tax cuts, it is essential that they be extended. Paul Krugman notwithstanding.
Senator Kent Conrad, a perfect voting record on the wisdom of taxation in the Senate. Thank you very much for joining us tonight, Senator.
You bet.
President Obama reaches a deal on tax cuts and reaches the breaking point with some Democrats who now want another Democrat to run for president. President Obama also promised to restore the importance of science to the White House. It apparently requires some serious scientific experimentation with the hosts of Mythbusters.